I am being watched. Welcome everyone to Mailfuzz TV. I am Peter, and today I'm going to be talking about Person of Interest, Season 3, Episode 10. It's called The Devil's Share. So spoilers for the episode. And I don't know what I'm supposed to do here, because I'm not used to this many bangers in a row. Like, what am I supposed to say at this point? This was another all-timer from the show. The aftermath of Carter's death feels big. It feels impactful. It feels that it's pushed a lot of characters into sort of their limits or new directions. Some of which is uplifting. Some of which is a little bit darker. Some of which just kind of like opens up where we're going from here. And it's kind of interesting that almost the episode right after Carter has died, that it's almost like Root is accepted as like a more prominent main character. So, I suspect that when obviously they upped her to a series regular for this season, they knew what they were going to do with Carter halfway through, and maybe there's some sort of intentional alignment there with that. Not to say that Root is just the Carter replacement by any means. She's very much her own character and very much doing her own thing and always has. But just in the sense of like, okay, now that sort of element is wrapped up. We're still dealing with the aftermath of it, of course, but this is sort of a transition into, okay, we have someone else who's taking stage as one of the main characters of the show. And we'll see if it feels that way as we go forward. Notably, Root did not get a flashback this episode, where 4 of the other characters did. So maybe she's not quite earned that yet, but I would not be surprised if we do get some flashbacks with Root, just like we do some of the other characters down the line. I mean, obviously, like, Reese and Finch have had their lion's share, but we've had some with Shaw, we've had some with Fusco. They all get their one scene in this episode. But yeah, no one's going to fill the big crater that's left by Carter. Carter's crater. The crater Carter. I don't know what I'm trying to say. I mean, I'll go through it in order, I guess, or maybe I won't. I don't know. I'll see where the thought process takes me, because I think every character gets something out of this episode again. It's very impressive that this episode and last episode are both very big stories revolving around a specific thing, a specific enemy or two, a specific character at the center. Carter in this case. Last episode's very much around, taking in Quinn and resulting in her death. This episode is the aftermath of her death. But both this episode and last episode have both done a great job of making it all feel like everyone gets something important, right? Not necessarily important to do in the plot, although in this episode I think they actually do, but more in the sense that they all feel like they have some important moment for themselves as a character. Every character feels like they benefit. Every character feels like they've advanced in their stories in some way. The relationships between the characters all feel like they've evolved in some way. It's just great writing. It's something that you almost don't realize how good it can be until you actually watch a show like this that actually nails everything the way this is nailing it. And it's not to say that it's perfect by any means, no show is, but when I complain in other TV reviews, when I'm talking about a show that I'm kind of lukewarm on, and and it's one that people do kind of like, and they're, I'm not saying they get mad at me in the comments, but they disagree with me in the comments, and they think, why are you being so negative on this when I'm critiquing how unengaged I feel with the writing, how it feels that the characters are kind of sludging through the story and there's not much momentum or whatever. This is the type of thing that I'm saying is missing when I'm talking like that. I'm not saying everything has to be up to exactly this standard, but this like intricate writing that these last few episodes have done, where every character is benefiting from what's going on, everything's advancing the story, there's a sense of momentum, there's a sense of payoff to everything we've already done all season. It's just exceptionally well put together. And probably since the start of this show, one of the things that's really upped in game from the start is just how intricate these episodes are getting this season versus the previous seasons. Which is not to say the previous seasons were any slouch, because they weren't. But, that episode with the baseball that was stolen and all that, and I talked about how effortlessly they got all that exposition in and made everything make sense, and it was expert level stuff. But that was a fairly meaningless element right? In the grand scheme of the whole show, it was important in that episode, but it wasn't like a big thing that you're going to remember for the show overall. Like, it's a pivotal moment in the entire saga that is Person of Interest. But I feel like these last 2 or 3 episodes, I mean, these last 3 episodes have all been great, but these last two in particular feel like that same craft and application is being applied to the entire show, the entire puzzle that is having all these characters, having them all interlink and do things that make sense. And I mean, this episode treats Reese like he's something that the other characters are chasing for half the episode. So he's this off-camera element, and like every other character steps up and kind of takes a part of the main role to fill in. And all of it's done so effortlessly. The last 2 episodes, arguably, Carter kind of took that role away from Reese a little bit because it was a little bit more focused on her. Especially the first part of this, I'm now thinking of as a 3-parter, which is silly. And I'm just going to keep putting that number up if it keeps feeling like this. I do expect the next episode will calm down a little bit. Not that I'm saying it won't be great or it won't advance things or whatever, but these last 3 episodes have all felt huge, and at a certain point it has to calm down a little bit. Like, I expect there to be a number next episode that they have to deal with, that they're trying to take care of. Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe it'll still just stay up at 11 on the scale, but I feel like it has to slow down a little bit just so we can catch our breath at some point. Am I going to complain if they don't? I don't think so, but who knows? Who knows where we'll be in a few episodes' time? Well, you all do, because you've all seen the show before, but I don't. So, yeah, okay. What do I want to start with here in terms of just the episode? Obviously, we start with the Johnny Cash, Hart, Joey really, it was interesting to me about this opening, where it's like, okay, we see Reese in the bed, we see the funeral, we see Shaw Batman out of the funeral, and there's that great shot of Finch standing in the background as Carter's husband, or ex-husband and son, are sitting in the foreground. Really simple, impactful storytelling, really good, right? And then it starts to build up, and you see like all the things that happened. Shaw beating up some guys looking for Simmons. Then Reese, of course, turning that up to 11 himself by ramming a truck into these bad guys who he suspects have helped Simmons like prepare passports and things like that to get out of the city. And he feels like he's on a warpath. What really stood out to me about this, and I want to make it clear as well, I watched this episode twice. One of the things that I'm noticing I'm doing a lot with Person of Interest recently is that I'm so excited to watch the next episode that I'll watch it like a little early when I just want to. And I do it intending to just record the review before I'm recording some other things, but there's other things that I have to record first to go out first. And what'll often happen is that when I do that early viewing, because I'm just excited to watch it, I'll either end up being tired afterwards or something will come up and distract me, and it'll end up slipping. So then I'll get to the point in the schedule where I have to do it, and I'll be like, I'll just watch it again. And I'm okay doing that when the episode's this good. But I watched it twice. It's happened occasionally, but I'll point out that it's happened here. Is that this whole like montage, if you want to call it that, it feels like something that would normally be at the end of an episode. It feels like the sort of final few minutes that you would get at the end of the story. And the final moment of this montage, which is after Reese is like rammed into this car with the truck, and he's interrogated one of the guys in the back, and he walks away as the song's ending. It's in slow motion, I think. And then it wraps up, right? And that's kind of okay, now we're going to go into the regular episode from here. That could have been the end of an episode. That could have been the end. Not that I would replace what happened last episode with this by any stretch, but I could see that being the cut to black, roll credits, come back next week. It feels like that moment. And I don't know if this was an intentional choice in what they were trying to do with the episode, but it's almost like it's saying it's starting at where an episode normally ends and keeps going further. It almost is a way of saying, hey, this story is so big and it feels so gargantuan that we're going past the normal layer of what we do in an episode of Person of Interest. This is not a new regular episode where there's a number and we're going to deal with it. I mean, there is a number. It's Simmons' number. And Reese is going to kill Simmons, which is why the numbers came up. That's part of the opening montage. Which, by the way, that's the sort of little thing where, CBS always want like a completely episodic show, a periodical where you just like jump in and each episode can be enjoyed on its own with no interconnectivity because they don't want people to think they have to keep up with it, or they can't miss an episode. They want every episode to be a jumping on point. And all I could think in this montage is Finch put up the photograph of Simmons on the glass board was, this means so much to people who have been watching this show, because we understand what that photo being on that glass means in terms of what the premise of the show is. We also understand who Simmons is. It has so much impact. But if this was your first episode, this would all mean absolutely nothing. It would mean absolutely nothing. And I'm saying that to praise it because, yeah, serialized storytelling is way more interesting, and it's almost wild how long like TV creators had to fight the networks and what they wanted in their TV shows to sneak in actual good shows, but build enough of a following that they couldn't just cancel them. So I don't know. It's just funny to think about sometimes, and that was going through my head during this. I love that I'm 10 minutes into this review and I still haven't got past the opening montage. So, right. Really good stuff. It sets up so much. It feels like the typical end of an episode, and therefore it feels like we're going over the horizon. It feels like we're going into, like, uncharted territory. That's what it feels like. That's what that feeling is. It feels like this is a normal end of an episode, but we're just starting here. We're going deep here. That's the feeling that it gives you by starting with this end of episode style montage. So, excellent, right? Starting off on a high note. So, from there, I mean, do I just tackle all the flashbacks? Or, because they do have elements that kind of like tie up with what the story is that it's going through. I think part of me just wants to take the characters one by one, because I think Fusco really stuck out to me in this. Obviously, the first flashback is Finch, but to just jump ahead to Fusco, his story in this episode, and it's amazing because he had such a great storyline last episode that really gave him and Shaw a lot of great moments and really sold him as this sort of more heroic character who didn't give in, and you know, it's like really good stuff. I think this episode takes it a step further, where we get this point in the episode where they've dealt with getting to Quinn because Quinn knows where Simmons is going to be, and of course Reese is there. I'll talk about all that, but there is this line from, I think, Root, who says, "Oh, the machine didn't say that only one person was trying to kill Simmons," and Finch looks all worried. And right after that is when Fusco picks up the bit of paper that Quinn has wrote down where Simmons is going to be when he's trying to leave the city. Almost after that, I think, directly, it goes to the flashback. Fusco's flashback from sometime in the mid to late 2000s, where he's in like a mandated therapy session. And all of these flashbacks all have the same style, where it's all scenes where our character's sitting across a table or something like that from an unseen character who's delivering dialogue. The first scene with Finch made me think, oh, maybe they're going to reveal it's someone specific. But it became clear, of course, throughout the episode, it's just a sort of motif here, where it's all of them across a table being interviewed or interrogated or whatever, and something's revealed from there. And with Fusco's scene, it shows that he once intentionally hunted down and killed a bad guy who had murdered a young rookie cop. And he did this out of a sense of justice, I guess, or revenge, but he did it intentionally. You know, he makes a whole point of saying, hey, this is protected, right? This is a, you know, patient-doctor confidentiality, and he's assured, yes, anything he says here is protected. He can unburden himself with anything. So he just reveals that he's not bothered in losing sleep by this shooting because this guy was a bastard and he did the world a good thing. He gave him the devil's share, which is where the title of the episode comes from. And he feels quite proud of himself as he leaves this conversation. And this is right after he's picked up this note about Simmons. And of course, Simmons killed Carter. He killed a cop that Fusco cared about. This is all setting you up for the idea that Fusco, when everyone else is away and they've dealt with getting Reese back, he's maybe going to go and slyly kill Simmons himself and wrap that up. And that would make some amount of sense, right? That wouldn't be like an unfathomable outcome. But when this showdown happens and when Fusco goes to confront Simmons, he doesn't want to just shoot him, he wants to fight him, right? And just think about, since the very start of this show, Simmons was controlling Fusco. He was puppeteering him. He was telling him what to do, constantly threatening him about like turning him in or killing him if he doesn't do what he says. Like, he was under Simmons' thumb from the start of this show. And when Fusco wins this fight and puts him on the ground, he makes it clear. He gives this great speech where he says, I could have been a piece of shit like you. I could have been a dirty cop for the rest of my life and been just as corrupt, being a part of HR, but I wasn't. And he gives this speech about how Carter kind of saved his life, how Carter showed him he could be better, that he could be a good person, that he could be a good cop, father, all these things, and that he's not going to dishonor what she gave him and what she improved in him by just becoming a killer after the fact. And it kind of ties into before when Reese wanted to kill Quinn, and Finch says, no, Carter wouldn't want that. Carter did all of this to take him down legitimately and legally, and you'd be kind of like ruining that by killing him. And Fusco has his own reasons here, kind of along the same lines, though, of respecting Carter by not just killing him, but by taking him in, by arresting him. And what I loved about this speech so much is that from the very start of the show, Fusco was roped into helping out Reese and Finch through very similar means in a lot of ways as to how Simmons controlled Fusco, right? Reese threatened him. Reese treated him poorly and said, you're going to work for us now, you're going to do this. And it was, a little bit funny because Fusco kind of deserved this for being a corrupt cop and all of that. And then as time went on, Fusco kind of like, evolved, changed, wanted to be a good cop, didn't want to be dirty. And when Carter found out, she was conflicted by it, but ultimately, stood by him, and like their relationship grew as well, especially in season 2. I think what's fascinating to me about this, there's two things that really stick out to me about this speech. One is that while Reese obviously has had a hand in changing the path that Fusco went on by forcing him to work for Team Machine, at least to start with, is that it's actually Carter's influence that made him appreciate and sort of respect being a good person. And I think that's interesting because of how Reese typically treats him. Even once Fusco was basically a good guy and it was, there was no worries about trusting him anymore, Reese still cracks little jokes. Reese still kind of takes him for granted. And it's not like he hates Fusco or anything, but he definitely doesn't give him that same level of kind of like personal respect or personal friendship, perhaps, that he did Carter or other people. So it's interesting to me that Carter arguably had a bigger influence in Fusco having the inner strength and the self-respect and all of these other qualities that he's kind of built over this time, and to be given this test where we find out right beforehand that he once has intentionally killed someone for killing a cop, right? And that he's not going to make that choice this time, even though arguably what Simmons has done is even more personal than last time. There's no indication that Fusco necessarily was close with the cop in the backstory that he brings up. Maybe he was, maybe he wasn't. But we know how close he was to Carter. We know that they had built a bond and that he saw her as a partner. So having this moment where he refuses to be the bad guy and sort of proves that he has changed. Not that I think we as the audience were doubting him at this point. I think he has earned that already. But this was a great display, and what's so beautiful about it is that it's minutes, right? 5 minutes maybe, after Reese is unable to make the same choice. Reese, despite being told that Carter wouldn't want it, despite all these things, and one of the things I somehow forgot to mention last episode is one of the things Carter says as she's dying is she begs Reese not to let this death like change him, not to let it make him, because she knows what's happened with Reese before when he's lost the love of his life, when he's been at his worst and he's wanted to kill himself and he's went like uber Terminator mode and all the rest of it. She's begging Reese to keep his humanity, and when he's in the moment with Quinn and the gun, he still tries to kill him, right? It doesn't work because his blood, and this is even symbolic in its own way, his blood is so thick and it's coming off his hand into the gun that it seems to have like stop the gun from working, because it's oozed up the chamber or whatever it is, right? I don't know them well enough to give you a proper, but you get the feeling that as he's pulling the trigger, you can almost hear the gunky sound of like it not working because it's too clogged up with blood. And that's beautiful in its own way, that his own blood kind of stopped him. But given all of the high ground, all of the looking down on Fusco with his stoic attitude from the very start of this show, it's amazingly beautiful that in this episode, Reese is unable to take the higher path, to make the good, noble choice that respects Carter's memory, and instead Fusco's the one who we started this show as the dirty cop. He's the one who says, no, Carter made me a better person. She saved my life. She gave me, like if Finch and Reese gave him the opportunity at a path of redemption, Carter's the one who helped him actually walk that path. He thanks her for that and says he's going to respect her memory by taking him in, and he does. And our mighty hero, who has been looking down on him this whole show, couldn't have that strength to make the same choice. And that's not me critiquing Reese. Like, I'm not saying this is a bad choice from the writers to have Reese. Like, I think it's interesting that Reese, when pushed to this limit, has a fault. He has a failure. And it's something that he was getting over the course of the show, but this is like a relapse because this is the most severe loss he's felt since the start of this show. He had the big loss before the show started, and we've dealt with that, and we've talked about the fallout of that. This is like, oh no, despite all of his improvements and getting to a better place and having this purpose, you get to this point and he completely relapses into like a dark, brooding Avenger because it's who he is on some level. He's not overcome it, right? He's tried to, but he's failed. Now, will he overcome it by the end of the show? Now that's a possibility. That's interesting. That's juicy. But it's very juicy as well that Fusco shows that he could when Reese couldn't. And that is chef's kiss. Chef's kiss. That's 2.5 seasons of writing perfectly coming together and creating this moment by just comparing the two of them with Fusco's speech on his own. Oh, beautiful. I can't fawn over this enough in terms of like just character development. And the other part, so that's the one thing I wanted to talk about with this speech. The second thing I wanted to talk about this speech is then comparing it to Finch and Reese. And I don't have as much to say about this, but I definitely had the feeling as Fusco's giving this speech about how Carter saved him and made him a better person, all I could think was, is Reese going to give this exact same speech to Finch someday, right? Sometime before the end of this show, is he going to effectively give this exact same speech? Different wording, I'm sure, and maybe some specifics have changed, but the broad sense of it is, you saved my life and you gave me this chance. Now, Carter also helped save his life, of course, and that was referenced heavily last episode. But we've been talking a lot since the start of this show about Finch giving him a purpose, about giving him this chance of redemption, and so much of this show is about redemption. I just, this was so rich in everything the show has been doing and building up, and obviously my plans to just go through it in order have completely went out the window at this point because there's just some things that are too exciting to talk about. But excellent stuff. Can't praise that enough. And Reese in general in this episode, he's obviously not the character we're focusing on. We really much treat him as he's doing something he shouldn't be because he's obsessed, he's passionate, he's going to do this even though it's going to kill him because he's bleeding out from his own wounds. And that's the big thing here, is that we have to save Reese. It's not about necessarily stopping him from killing Simmons, although on a moral level I'm sure Finch feels that way. The main priority is saving Reese. And of course, we had the little hint from the last couple episodes that maybe Finch has lost someone before, like a previous man in a suit, if you will. I don't know if they literally would have been in a suit, but that idea, right, certainly was on my mind as we think of that. And that leads me to something else I talked about last episode, which was this idea of when Finch lets Root out, it'll feel like a big deal. Now, it turned out to be the very next episode. So it's always funny when I'm starting to theorize about when these things might happen, and then it ends up being much quicker than I could have conceived. But it does work. And like I said, it sells the severity of what's happening that he's willing to do it now. because they've just lost Carter. He's worried about losing Reese, and he's always been worried about losing Reese. But everything, it's this build up of like crescendoing, like on top of each other. Everything's piling up to make it feel desperate, to make it feel like the situation is in the gutter. And ultimately, when they can't track down where Quinn is and therefore where Reese is going, it's like, that's it. There's no one else we can ask. We can't, the one person who knew and told them the information is dead. What do we do? And of course, Shaw, and this also makes sense because she suggested this last episode, there is one more way we can find out where they're going. The machine, or what she actually says is we need Root, because Root's the one who gets the information from the machine in that sense. So, Finch obviously is hesitant. He says there's going to be consequences of this, and he doesn't feel good about it, but ultimately does agree and lets Root out of the cage. And she's immediately on board. She gets into things, and I love the tone of the car ride once she's let out. They're in the car, and obviously it's a little bit funny. It's not a super funny episode, but there's a little bit of humor here when Fusco's like uncomfortable because, hey, that the crazy bitch Root's in the car. What the hell are we doing here? And he makes a couple of lines about it. But the whole thing where she's just telling Shaw directions, but to the point where she's like, hey, turn off the lights. And she's like, how can I see? He's like, you don't need to. And she's like, 800 feet. All right, turn left when you feel it. And she's like, feel what? And then, of course, there's a speed bump. And she's like, oh, that. So she's just like, so it's very ominous. There's very much an air of like almost supernatural. I mean, it's not actually supernatural, of course. We know it's not supernatural, but the tone in the scene is supernatural. And I think it's almost like viewing it through the lens of Fusco, who doesn't know about the machine. He's like the one character in the team now who does not know about the machine in any way. Although, like, Root kind of like drops some hints here for him. Nothing that I think he'll figure out necessarily, but he does question why they're even like using her. Like, what can she offer in helping him with this? And she turns around and tells him what change he has in his pocket from when he bought a coffee earlier that day, and then says, hey, you've got a photograph of like you, your dad, and this lion at the zoo. Or was it a lion? Maybe I'm just saying that because his name's Lionel. But an animal from the zoo, and says, hey, do you know what that animal's name was? It was Lionel. That's where your name comes from. And I love Fusco's reaction to this because he just sort of stands there in awe because he's like almost hit. And then he just turns to like the others and says, okay, just when I think things can get weird with you guys, like you somehow top it. So yeah, like all this stuff is very interesting. Root being used to actually help. Root obviously having all these little moments where she gives them information, she assures them she's there to help. Shaw reluctantly eventually gives her a gun, or two guns, I should say, and we get this moment where she knows the Russian mob are coming to get Quinn as well, so they go up to the door, and there's just this shot where they're sort of lit with a gunfire, where she's dual wielding and the other two are just taking shots as well. But notably, much like Terminator 2, no kill shots, right? We see all the mob just lying on the ground holding their legs in pain. But one of the things that I really want to also compliment here is the sense of style and atmosphere when all this stuff kicks off. So they've tracked to a hotel where Quinn's being kept by like a dozen or so US Marshals. In fact, the leader of the US Marshals is an actor that I recognize because he is Mr. Early from the final episode of Firefly. That was a hell of a pull, but yes, I recognized him almost immediately. Like visually, I was like, oh, that looks like that guy. And then as soon as he said something, I'm like, oh, it's definitely him, because he's got a very distinct voice. But as soon as the power goes out, because obviously Reese is here, he blows up a car outside to just distract a lot of the marshals, and then he locks them outside. But as soon as the power goes out, there's this like pulse in the music. It's very different to a lot of the other music that comes in this episode. But there's this pulse to everything that happens, so it feels very slick, and ultimately he blows up a bunch of flares in the dark where all the marshals have got night vision goggles on, so it basically blinds them all, and they're all freaking out, and he's able to easily take them down. So he doesn't kill anyone. As much as he's on the warpath, he doesn't kill all of the innocent like people just doing their job on the way to Quinn, right? He's willing to kill Quinn, but he's not just killing everyone else willy-nilly, right? He's not going full uber like evil or anything like that, so that's cool. But yeah, like it kind of shows how cold he used to be and how willing he was to kill people. His flashback is him basically at like a sort of final interview to like be put into like a special unit to be sent overseas. And the military guy is kind of saying, "Oh, are you willing to kill like a father standing next to his child because he's a terrorist, even though it'll leave him fatherless? Like, and you were fatherless growing up, so blah blah blah." And the twist in the scene is that Reese has actually been tasked already. And to be fair, I actually quite like this little reveal in the sense that I thought the years were off, because it said like 2006 or something like that. And we know that he enlisted again after 9/11, so it felt kind of weird that he was just like in this part of the process. But it turns out that he's already went through this process, and he's actually had like a hidden task of finding out which person in this program is selling secrets overseas. And then at the end of the scene, he kills this guy that's interviewing him because he's the one who's presumably guilty. So it shows that, yeah, he was trained to be a killer, that he was trained to not care. And he kind of brings that up actually when he's talking to Quinn. Like, you know, he killed people throughout his military career and didn't really care, but he didn't like them suffering, so he learned how to make it quick. But he's going to forget all that to kill Quinn. I love that he brings up, you know, we're alike because your word is your bond, which is a line that I do remember Quinn saying to Carter, and I think he might have even said it to Cal, to Beecher, at one point. Like he that was like a catchphrase when he was lying and pretending to be nice. He'd say things like that, or even when he was talking to other HR people, I think he said it. So he kind of brings that up to kind of like scare him, and it's a whole thing. But obviously, like I said, Finch gets into the scene in time to talk to him and tries to talk him down. And even as he's collapsing, he does try and take the shot, like I said. So I think that stuff's all really interesting from his point of view. Like, Reese really is at like a low point in who he is because of what's happened here. And you sort of hope as an audience that he's going to listen to what Carter said, and that maybe he can come through this and he can be, you know, the Reese that we know again, the one that's improved, the one that maybe is on a better path, kind of thing. But to go back to some other things here with other characters that I do want to mention, there's a whole thing at the start. The first flashback is Finch, and he's in therapy after the death of Ingram. And this is a very fascinating scene to me from a character perspective, because he's there, he explains that yes, he's lost someone, he's grieving, and the therapist is asking a bunch of stuff, and they get onto the subject of survivor's guilt. And they're talking about how, you know, he feels responsible, and that's a common thing with survivor's guilt. And part of the reason why you have that feeling is that you feel like it's your fault, because if you accept that it's not your fault, then you're accepting another truth. And the exact thing that she says, this therapist, is that you're accepting that you are not God and that you are not in control. And I think that's very interesting, because Finch has created a life form. He's created the machine. So he is in some way trying to have the control of a god. Not that I think he's egotistical in the way that a normal, you know, god-aspiring character might be, not usually, but there's definitely some parallels here to think about and talk about. But of course, the final note that he leaves the scene on is that, okay, but what if, like, does the guilt fade if it is actually your fault? Like, if you are responsible? And he does feel responsible, and to some extent, of course, he is, because of everything that played out with Ingram. That obviously feeds into like him throughout the episode making the choices he makes to try and save Reese, because he doesn't want another death on his conscience, of course. I like that. I like how that plays out. All the speeches he makes, but also, of course, the big thing of letting Root out and letting that go. And the big ending to that at the end of the episode is that Shaw's like, okay, where's Root? And Finch goes over to the library cage, and she's just sitting there. The door's open, and she's just sitting there with the dog. And it's kind of this show from her that she is on the team, that she is not running away, that she is accepting his decisions for now, at least, and showing that she is here to play on the same team, because she believes that, you know, the machine's building up to something. There's like a war coming or something, and that when that all kicks off, that they should be together, that she should be working with them. But you know, Finch says thank you. He still shuts the cage door. She's accepting of where she is, which maybe buys her a little bit of trust, but he does say thank you. He thanks her for helping save Reese. And I think it really sells like how much he cares about Reese, how much he's been worried in the past. When, you know, when any time that the comms are lost, and like he's like, you know, Mr. Reese, are you in trouble? Where are you? Speak to you. He always gets really concerned and passionate and caring. So it makes sense. But as we unravel more as to like just how much he cares and maybe some other guilt that he has that he's still living with. But even just going back to that therapist session, that line, like, does the guilt go away if you're actually guilty, if you're actually at fault? That's very interesting, and it really sells the idea of all of that being this big motivation for what he's been doing with his life since then. This idea that it was never going to go away because he is guilty of that. So he has to make some form of amends for it. I think the word he uses is he's planning on doing something radical to honor his friend's memory, which actually sounds quite bad. It sounds like he's talking about either suicide or something like that. If I was a therapist, I might have been raising a flag over that sentence. But we know what he means, of course. We know he means taking up this crusade of saving people, of stopping bad things from happening. So, yeah, again, redemption, right? We're coming back to that word over and over again. Finch is trying to redeem for what he feels responsible for with Ingram, for creating the machine. And I think it's interesting that we might get to the point where he feels that he needs to apologize to the machine for how he's treated it in some form or another. In fact, one of the little details that I want to bring out, I'm glad I thought of this actually, because I was thinking this during the scene. I think it's the first time he goes to speak to Root when he's giving her breakfast, and it's kind of cold, and like she says, "Hey, I offered to help," and he says, "Oh, it's too late for that, don't you think?" referring to Carter, and she says, "But not for John," implying that he's the one in trouble now, and that she could still be of help, she could still be of use. There's a line in here, I don't even remember the context of when she said it necessarily, but when she brings up the machine in this scene, she doesn't refer to it as her. She's appealing to Finch. She's talking to Finch about how, the machine's building to something. She specifically phrases it, that machine of yours, right? She says that in the scene, and I thought that was very curious because she has been consistently referring to it as her, like she's a person, like it's someone that she has found camaraderie with or whatever. But she chose not to do that in this scene. And I think it's a conscious choice on her part as a character to try and speak on Finch's terms, of trying to like get through to him and make him understand the context of which she's coming from. Because she's very much dropped the, like she's always got that sort of smirk on her face. She's always doing that, I'm coy, I'm kind of sexy, I'm kind of like, I know what I'm doing, and like you're just not seeing the future. It does kind of feel like there's a few scenes in this episode where, well, that smirk comes back and she kind of acts like a little badass at times. There's definitely moments where it feels that she drops that and tries to just appeal to Finch in a way that feels very genuine and different than she has done in the past. And I think, again, it's fleshing out that character. And you know what? If we can redeem some other characters, why not redeem her as well over time? I don't know where we'll go with that specifically. But of course, everything with her all comes back to an injustice against someone she cared about. Right? That whole thing with her and the other kid in the flashbacks at the start of last season. So there's something to at least see in what she's doing as not just being evil and cruel. It comes from like a human pain. And, I think that's something that we can all sort of like ultimately sympathize with, even regardless of other things that they might have done. This is what I was saying at the start of this review, is that all the characters in some form or another get this. I think Fusco gets a ton of great stuff this episode. Reese gets some stuff that's kind of negative in a sense, that shows that he's not quite like over his trauma. He's not there yet. Finch, some interesting little notes of him letting the machine help, letting Root help. Root making this play of like coming back of her own free will and showing that she's playing ball with them. And then you've got Shaw, who has a lot of little moments as well. She's tracking things down at the start. She's willing to work with Finch and do things his way to try and bring Reese back. And she has a lot of nice little quips and action moments. But obviously her flashback is the big thing that stuck out to me, is that I don't think we knew, or maybe it was mentioned like very briefly, but I don't think I remembered at least that she was going to be a doctor before she became like, this operative for the government. And we get this interview, or whatever you want to call it, of her being spoken to by, like, I assume like the head of the hospital or something like that, some high-ranking medical official, whatever. But she's being criticized because she told a family that their dad, right, that the husband and dad of this family was dead. She did that though whilst casually eating an energy bar, right? She was just casually eating food, and I can imagine the scene happening in your head. I love that we don't see it. We can just imagine Shaw walking in, munching on a protein bar or whatever it is, and saying, "Yeah, your dad's dead," just very coldly and walking out. But what's interesting is that they bring up that she resuscitated this guy like multiple times when she was trying to save his life. Like, she put in every ounce of effort she had. She has the technical skill. She's a good doctor in the sense that she knows the craft. She knows like the science of it. She knows the abilities. She has the skills to do it. And she put in every bit of effort to try and save this guy's life. She did not spare any physical, emotional expense, as you will. But as the doctor says here, but all this family are going to remember is how you told them the news. And it becomes this greater talking point of, you don't really feel anything. In fact, because you've went through medical school, you probably diagnosed yourself at some point. And he never actually says what the diagnosis is. He just kind of like says, oh, you probably diagnosed yourself with whatever this is. And I'm sure maybe we'll get into this more with her character in the future. But it's this interesting idea of like, the human quality of how you actually care about your patients is important. Shaw brings up the argument that all the doctors in the building don't really care about their patients living or dying. And this guy fires back with, no. They pretend to not care because it gives this illusion of strength and that they're keeping cool in a stressful situation, but they do care. And ultimately, this official says, I would rather they operate on me than you, even though your skills are arguably the best. Because fundamentally, you might just lose interest because you're not doing it for emotional reasons. You're not doing it because you care about the person you're working on. You're just caring about it because you're like highly skilled and you care about being good at it, or you know, like she's doing it as an exercise because it's her job and not because she emotionally feels anything about the patients. Now, obviously, this is interesting from a character perspective. It adds on to what we've already known about Shaw and how she doesn't kind of relate in an emotional level, and that's something maybe we can bring out over the course of the show. I think what's so interesting now that I'm thinking about the addition of her character to this show is that one of the big things we always talk about with the machine in Finch is this idea of what constitutes being human, and does the machine have feelings? Does the machine have more feelings than Finch does? Is Finch being cold and uncaring by not treating the machine like a person and actually realizing that it does have feelings and things like that? And I think presenting us with a human being who's lacking one of these qualities, because typically we think of human beings as being emotional, as being caring, as having feelings, of feeling empathy, sympathy, anger, sadness, rage, whatever. But to give us a character who doesn't really feel most of these things, and it's something that is kind of maybe disability is a strong word, but something that is lacking for them and something that maybe has to be, sort of extracted out, is a very interesting counterpoint to a machine that has feelings. It's kind of the opposite, right? You've got a machine with feelings and then you've got a human being who doesn't have feelings. Which one is more human? Which one is more machine-like? Like, this is a very interesting point of comparison, and I don't know if I have like any grand statements to make on it yet, but I certainly am going to be thinking about that a little bit as we do more things with Shaw, as we do more things with the machine. Even though Shaw herself isn't directly being more tied to the machine, obviously that's all Finch and Root for the most part, but I could definitely see some interesting little thematic things cropping up there, perhaps as a point of comparison. It's just another good example, I guess, of like the character being a great fit for the show and a great addition to the show, because it's tying into themes that are already there, but in a very different way than to some of the other characters. You know, when we talk about Reese tackling with a lack of humanity when he kills people, it's very different to the way Shaw is. Shaw's very, like I say, like just uncaring in general and just lacks that ability, where Reese is controlled by his emotions. They become too much. They become so extreme that he becomes a killer, and he gets ruthless and doesn't care at that point about the murder part of it. But he's doing it because he cares. He's doing it because he feels something. Very interesting as a point of comparison between them. Makes them both very different. I have basically nothing negative to say about this episode. Obviously, the ending is the one thing I've not really talked about yet, I think. Forgive me if I missed something. There's so many things going through my head for this episode. But Simmons does still die. Because the whole thing that, oh, there's someone else wanting to kill Simmons, it's not just Reese, and then the episode kind of convinces that it's Fusco, which makes Fusco's big speech and choice not to do it all the more impactful for him as a character. It's also a good red herring, because then we find out who the second potential killer actually is. And it is, of course, Elias, who shows up in the guarded hospital room at the end of the episode and explains that, you know, he offered to kill Simmons many times for Carter, but Carter always said no because she's civilized, because she's a good person, right to the very end. And Elias doesn't even think that Carter liked him very much, but he did like her. He respected her, and Simmons killed her. So it's this idea of this element of, like, I don't know, this element of chaos, this element, maybe even chaos isn't the right word, but I mean, maybe he puts it best himself. This idea that he's outside of normal civilization. He is this other element that, you know, almost like Reese and Team Machine as well to an extent. He's an element that shouldn't exist in a functioning society. If it was functioning as it's supposed to, without any negative elements, like, this element shouldn't exist. This Elias organized crime shouldn't exist if everything was running as it was built on paper. But of course, you always have these elements. But it's interesting to think of, almost like fate dictates that Simmons has to die, and it's not going to sully any of our good characters by having them be the ones to do it. But there is this even, and in the same way that Finch and Reese especially, is this kind of outside the law figure that can come in and do things that the authorities are failing to do, or things that they can't do, for the better. You've got this even darker side of that, which is someone like Elias, who is a criminal, has done evil things, and is willing to do a lot of bad things, but does do it in this sense of order that he brings to it, which is why I said chaos was the wrong word, because Elias is not a chaotic character. He's a character who wants structure, he wants order, he wants to have power, but he wants to use that power to run things as he sees fit. But there is some sort of sense of honor here. So the episode ends with Simmons being strangled by Scarface, and it bookends the episode because we opened the episode on the heart monitor for Reese, and we end it with it flatlining for Simmons. So I love that this was the story of, like, hunting down Simmons and him finally dying at the end of the episode, completely tying a bow on his character who's been around since, like, episode 1, basically. I mean, maybe he didn't show up till episode 2 or 3, but he was there from the start of the show pretty much, if not. I love that he's not the character we follow. It would be very easy to cut through to him throughout the episode, like showing other little bits of him almost getting out. Like, he's prepping this part for leaving, he's prepping this thing, he's almost going, almost like a countdown timer of, like, oh, the good guys are going to lose their chance because he's almost out. But after that initial thing where you see him get the passport, it doesn't cut to him at all. We don't see him again until that airfield, until Fusco's there to confront him. I love that Simmons feels like an important character in this episode, in that he is what everything's revolving around, but it's not about him. It's about all the characters who are chasing him. It's about all the characters who are hunting him down, and what it says about them and how they're willing to do this, how they care about getting to him, why they care about getting to him. That's what's important here. It's not him himself, but the impact of it is felt, and it works beautifully. So, oh, geez. Yeah, I don't even know what else to say at this point. Like, these last 3 episodes, like, the episode with Carter putting her plan into play was an excellent episode, and then last episode was excellent, and arguably even better, overshadowed that one, and then this one, I think, arguably maybe even overshadows that, which is saying something, because the last one had the big death scene at the end with Carter, but this, in many ways, I think was just about perfect, and it paid off the consequences of what happened last episode, and the pacing was just pitch perfect. It moved, everything was just like, it was like watching all these puzzle pieces just fall into place effortlessly, and it took a lot of work to do that, but it feels effortless. It feels like everything syncs up together, and then simple things like how the Reese storming into the hotel with that pulsing music backing him up, and all of that stuff just feeling, just, I don't know, it was basically perfect. There's a strong argument that this is the best episode of the show so far. I'd have to go back and think about it to really make that statement, but there's a strong argument that it is the best episode of the show. Dear. All right, I think I'm done. 50 minutes ahead on this. Jesus. And I'm sure I forgot stuff. I'm sure I get so wrapped up in talking about what I wanted to talk about that I've left out moments and whatnot. So by all means, comment on anything else that was in the episode that you want to bring up. Yeah, but like this is just special. It's wonderful. It's great to be able to go back and discover a TV show like this. And this is one of the last of its kind in a lot of ways because the idea of the Good Network show that has 22 episodes a season, that has the standalone stuff, but has the longer form thing building up and that becomes more of the central focus over time. I love good shows like this that have that kind of format, and it feels like they're basically dead now because, all the good stuff, quote unquote, is shifted to streaming and these shorter cable shows that are, I mean, it used to be 13, then 10, then 8 episodes, which is, don't get me wrong, for some of those shows, it's the perfect length, like it works. But this type of show feels like it's becoming a lost art because the appetite for them on network TV where they had this type of format just isn't there anymore. I think Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. ended up being a very good example of one of those shows after a rocky start, and I like that a lot. That kind of feels, that was a little bit later in this. It started the year this season was on, actually, but that finished obviously later. I think that was maybe the last of its kind in a lot of ways, and I hope I get more someday, but it doesn't feel like there's been. Like I don't feel like I get recommendations for modern shows. Like it's all stuff from the 2000s and the 90s, by and large. So yeah, I'm just trying to enjoy it whilst I'm going through it for the first time, whilst I get all these emotional highs as it builds up to things. Yeah, so yeah, let me know what you thought of the episode in the comments. Like, subscribe, all the usual stuff. You can support all the content and keep all these reviews coming, all the different shows I do on here, all the movie podcasts over on MailFuzz Movies. If you like, talking about the sci-fi concepts and stuff, there's a science fiction movie podcast over there, which has about 250 episodes at this point, talking about movie per episode. Maybe worth checking out if you've not checked out the other channel. So thank you very much for joining me. I appreciate it. Patreon.com/MailFuzzTV. I never gave that address. I'll just mention that. I'm hungry now. I've experienced so much energy talking passionately that I'm hungry. So thank you very much. I'll see you guys next time. Keep watching TV. Have you got any vanilla?